Welcome to our presentation about economic oppression toward African Americans. This is by the Vin Noh. The goal of this presentation is to measure the progress toward which African Americans can reach economic equality. We will be doing this by looking at three separate eras of history: slavery, Jim Crow, and modern America. Importance of economic equality. We are making this presentation to do our small part in exposing huge areas of improvement in our country's model that hinder its progression toward the far more progressive state it should be in. Economic equality for a country allows the entirety of its population to participate meaningfully in the workforce and subsequently create a higher standard of living throughout the success that would naturally occur in the public sector, as well as deconstruct certain institutions that prolong the effects of racism. Analyzing how limited a minority's participation in the workforce is can be indicative of widespread discrimination that pins a whole people down into an inescapable cycle of destitution. One huge area of improvement that is currently affected by the economic inequality in the United States is the availability of healthcare. As you can see by the graph I placed on the left, the minorities in this little graph have a much higher percentage of uninsured people in their population than do the white people. And if you see by these news reports on the right from the local news channels of different states, black deaths according to COVID-19 are exceedingly high compared to white people as well. And this is a huge problem because they do not have access to healthcare that they're being affected by the pandemic so awfully.
Okay, in the first graph, it talks about holdings of family wealth in America in trillions of dollars. And as you can see, the ones who own the far majority of it are the top 10%, while the bottom 50%, as said, largely consisting of minorities, own just a very small amount of it, looking like under a few billion. And the second graph here, it talks about weekly median income for U.S. women/men by race. And no matter what race, on every part of it, the women make less than the men, invariably. And the races that make the least amount of weekly median income are African Americans and Latino Americans. Slaves were restricted from working any job other than complete servitude and could not earn money. Contrastly, slave owners extracted around $14 trillion, adjusted for inflation, of manual labor in total from slaves. Worse still, the practice was seen as commonplace and an unchangeable circumstance for African Americans. The lowest point for African people brought to this country and the African Americans born here was their participation in the economy was comprised of 100% slave labor. Underfunded black schools survived with a bare minimum amount of necessary resources and could be extremely overcrowded with students. Such schools couldn't offer a lot in the way of academics or skills. Some researchers estimate the lack of applicable skills cut African American wages by 50%. However, discrimination also directly barred from keeping jobs in the first place, by creating unneeded rigor in the workplace or denying positions altogether for African Americans. While some of the many blatant injustices imposed upon African Americans have been shunned and outlawed, many still face the effects of years of consolidated schemes to keep minorities under, as seen in the overrepresentation of African Americans in the U.S. prison population and the overrepresentation of African Americans in entry-level job positions.
Our projections for the future are that oppression will continue, but it might actually forget the issue of race and place further emphasis on the issue of class. As time goes on, racial segregation obviously has disappeared more and more, but debt and the divide between the 1% and the 99 has not. And we think that will actually continue to grow because money will be more important than going out of your way to show discrimination.